Right now, an extreme heat warning covers the entire Las Vegas Valley, in effect from 10 o'clock this morning through 8 o'clock Monday night, with the National Weather Service forecasting afternoon highs between 108 and 114 degrees, temperatures that could exceed 115 along the Colorado River Valley and climb past 120 in Death Valley. That warning arrived within days of something almost nobody watching the forecast connected together, because just 1 week earlier, this same stretch of desert was under flash flood watches, monsoon thunderstorms, and blowing dust, while 300 miles east, floodwaters were tearing through the Texas Hill Country. If you have felt southern Nevada swing from storm, warnings straight into a dangerous heat wave in barely 7 days. Here is what almost nobody is explaining clearly enough, that whiplash is not random bad luck stacking up back to back. It is a specific, increasingly documented atmospheric pattern that climate scientists have given an actual name. The same mechanism driving it in the desert Southwest right now is the same one that turned bone-dry soil in Texas into a flood disaster weeks earlier. This is the story of what is actually replacing the monsoon over Las Vegas, why scientists are calling this pattern something far more serious than routine desert weather, and why what comes after Monday could matter more than the heat warning itself. No exaggeration, just what the current data from the National Weather Service, NOAA, and the researchers studying this exact pattern actually shows. Drop a comment and tell me if the weather where you live has swung from one extreme straight into another over the past 2 weeks, because if it has, you are living through exactly the pattern this video explains. I read every one of these. If you want grounded weather coverage built on actual forecast data instead of recycled panic, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people before the next swing catches them off guard. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand why this heat warning is not just an ordinary hot weekend in the desert, you first need to understand what it is replacing. For much of the past 2 weeks, the desert Southwest sat underneath an active monsoon pattern, the seasonal reversal of prevailing winds that pulls deep tropical moisture north out of the Gulf of California and the eastern Pacific. That moisture fed pop-up thunderstorms across Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, triggering flood watches from Flagstaff to St. George and dropping 1 to 2 inches of rain an hour in spots, enough to send flash floods through slot canyons and dry washes that had been bone dry for months. Meteorologists at the National Weather Service office in Las Vegas confirmed this week that the same high-pressure system now driving the heat warning is precisely what pushed that monsoon moisture out of the way, according to NWS meteorologist Matt Woods, who described a strong ridge building over the southwest as the direct cause of the coming temperature spike. A monsoon needs moist, unstable air to survive. A rebuilding heat dome does the opposite, capping the atmosphere and shoving that moisture out from underneath it, the same basic mechanism that ends any heat wave when a storm system finally muscles in, just running in reverse. This is not unique to Nevada. The exact same ridge rebuilding over the interior west is why Phoenix moved through the identical sequence just days ahead of Las Vegas. An extreme heat watch upgraded to a warning for the same Thursday through Monday window, arriving on the heels of a flood watch across northern and southeastern Arizona that dropped 1 to 2 inches of rain and kicked up blowing dust across the Phoenix metro. 2 major desert cities, roughly 300 miles apart, moved through the same flood-to-heat transition within roughly 48 hours of each other, which is exactly the kind of regional signature that tells meteorologists they are looking at a genuine large-scale pattern rather than an isolated local fluke. The specifics of this particular heat warning make it more dangerous than a typical southern Nevada summer weekend, and the reason has less to do with the daytime highs than with what happens after dark. Woods was explicit that the bigger concern through the weekend is overnight lows, which are expected to stay above 90 degrees in many parts of the valley, well above the seasonal average overnight low of 83. The valley is not expected to break daytime heat records this weekend, since the average high for late July already sits at 105, but forecasters say overnight low records are a real possibility precisely because the atmosphere is not cooling down the way it normally would after sunset. That distinction matters enormously for public health, since overnight cooling is what allows the human body to recover from a day of extreme heat exposure, and a string of nights that never drop below 90 removes that recovery window entirely. This is not the valley's first brush with extremes this year. Las Vegas hit 100 degrees for the first time in 2026, back on May 8th, then set its hottest March day on record at 90s. 8 degrees during 8 consecutive days of record-breaking March heat, and reached 111 degrees on July 8th, the hottest day of the year so far. Layered on top of that, the valley just snapped a 124-day rainless streak on June 23rd with a mere 0.02 of an inch, meaning the ground beneath this heat wave was already parched before the monsoon briefly interrupted it. Here is where this story stops being a routine weather segment and becomes something scientists are treating with real seriousness. Climate researchers have a specific term for exactly what southern Nevada has lived through these past 2 weeks, swinging from flash flood watches to an extreme heat. Warning in barely 7 days, and they call it hydroclimate whiplash. A team of climate scientists led by researchers at the University of California, Los Angeles, published a major review of this phenomenon in the journal Nature Reviews Earth and Environment in January of 2025, defining hydroclimate whiplash as rapid, large swings between extremely wet and extremely dry. Conditions occurring within the same season or even within the same month. Their research found that this kind of whiplash has already increased globally as the planet warms, driven by what the scientists call an expanding atmospheric sponge, the simple physical fact that for every additional degree Celsius of warming, the atmosphere can hold roughly 7% more water vapor. That means the same warming atmosphere can produce both more intense downpours when moisture is present and more severe drying when it is not, swinging harder between both extremes rather than settling into a calmer middle ground. This is not an abstract academic finding disconnected from what just happened on the ground. Climate researchers pointed to the catastrophic Texas Hill Country flooding, which killed multiple people and sent the Guadalupe River surging out of its banks earlier this month as a textbook example of the same mechanism, because the soil across that region had been sitting in exceptional drought conditions right before the rain arrived, meaning it could not absorb the sudden downpour, turning a heavy rain event into a lethal flash flood almost immediately. That same expanding atmospheric sponge is what makes the current southern Nevada pattern worth watching closely rather than dismissing as an unrelated coincidence of storms followed by heat. The monsoon moisture that soaked the region over the past 2 weeks did not fully recharge the parched ground underneath it. An early forecast guidance is already pointing toward monsoon moisture attempting to push back into the region as soon as midweek, once the current ridge of high pressure weakens. If that pattern holds, the same valley currently baking under an extreme heat warning could be back under flash flood concerns within days of the heat breaking. The exact whiplash sequence climate scientists have been documenting, just compressed into a matter of 2 or 3 weeks instead of playing out across an entire season. The broader atmospheric driver behind all of this traces back to something far larger than any single week of Nevada weather, a strengthening El Nino event that NOAA declared had officially formed in June of this year. The Climate Prediction Center's most recent diagnostic discussion places the event under an active El Nino advisory, with forecasters projecting it will continue strengthening through the remainder of the year and estimating a 97% chance it persists into early spring of 2027. Separate modeling out of NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory goes further, with every one of 30 ensemble model runs this July pointing toward a peak strength competitive with the strongest El Nino events recorded over the past century, language that suggests forecasters are watching a historically significant event take shape, rather than a routine seasonal fluctuation. El Nino years do not directly cause any single heat wave or any single storm, and no scientist studying this pattern is claiming otherwise, but they do reliably load the broader atmospheric dice toward exactly the kind of amplified ridging and more volatile moisture swings the Southwest is living through right now, which is precisely why climate researchers are watching this particular summer's back and forth with more attention than an ordinary year would warrant. It is worth being precise about what all of this does and does not tell us, because that distinction is exactly the kind of nuance that tends to get lost once a forecast starts sounding dramatic. Nobody's studying this. Pattern is predicting the specific day the monsoon returns to Las Vegas, and nobody is claiming this particular heat warning is somehow historically unprecedented on its own, since the Mojave Desert has always produced brutal July heat. What the data does show, clearly and specifically, is that the underlying atmosphere producing this heat wave is the same warmer, moisture-loaded atmosphere that produced the flash floods immediately before it, and that the swing between those two extremes is happening faster and harder than the historical record for this region would suggest is normal. That is a documented shift in pattern, not a guess about next Tuesday's forecast, and treating it otherwise would misrepresent exactly what the researchers behind this term are actually claiming. So what does this actually mean if you live anywhere across the desert Southwest, or anywhere that has felt this same kind of whiplash recently? The practical lesson is that treating each extreme in isolation, celebrating the monsoon rain without asking what a parched summer produces when it finally arrives, or shrugging off a heat warning as just another hot desert weekend, misses the pattern connecting both. Stay attentive. Through Monday to the overnight low guidance specifically, since that is the exact detail forecasters say matters most for public health this weekend, avoid strenuous outdoor activity during peak hours between 10 in the morning and 6 at night, and keep watching the forecast into next week rather than assuming the story ends once temperatures ease. Because if monsoon moisture does push back into the region, as some guidance already suggests, the same Parched ground currently baking under this heat warning will be primed for exactly the kind of flash flood risk that just proved lethal in Texas. Remember, too, that heat remains the deadliest weather hazard in the United States, killing more people in an average year than hurricanes, tornadoes, and flooding combined, which is precisely why forecasters keep stressing the overnight numbers, even though they generate far less public attention than a dramatic flash flood warning does. Check on elderly neighbors and anyone without reliable air conditioning, keep pets off pavement during peak heat, and treat cooling center information, which Clark County has already activated at community centers and libraries across the valley, as seriously as you would treat a hurricane evacuation notice somewhere else in the country. The honest, grounded summary is this: Las Vegas is currently under an extreme heat. Warning through Monday evening with highs near 110 to 114 degrees and overnight lows that may set records specifically, because they are refusing to drop below 90. A warning that arrived within days of flash flood watches covering the same region as monsoon. Moisture retreated ahead of a rebuilding ridge of high pressure. Climate scientists have a specific name for this kind of rapid swing between extremes: hydroclimate whiplash, a pattern documented in a major 2025 study to be intensifying globally as a warmer atmosphere holds and then dumps more moisture than it used to, the same mechanism researchers pointed to in the deadly Texas Hill Country flooding earlier this month. Behind both the current heat and the monsoon that preceded it sits a rapidly strengthening El Nino event that NOAA and independent modeling both describe as potentially one of the strongest in decades, reinforcing exactly the kind of volatile back and forth this region has lived through over the past 2 weeks, rather than allowing the pattern to settle down. We are going to keep tracking this exact pattern the way we tracked it today, straight from the National Weather Service, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, and the researchers actually studying hydroclimate whiplash, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss whether that monsoon moisture actually pushes back into the Southwest next week, because based on everything we just walked through, this pattern is nowhere close to finished. And leave that comment below. Tell me if your region has swung from one weather extreme straight into another recently, because that whiplash is worth understanding now before the next swing arrives. Because behind every one of these forecast numbers is a family in Las Vegas keeping the air conditioning running through a weekend that will not cool off even after dark, and a family in the Texas Hill Country still cleaning up from a flood that the same atmospheric mechanism helped produce weeks before this heat wave ever built. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. We will see you in the very next one.